So, color in reverse. Welcome to the Pantheon.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, I have seen your sets this a handful of times.
Yeah, by now.
And each time it's always just this full body experience from whether you have the guitars, you have just your panel,
Mhm.
controller, board, um, from the lights to the masters, all these things going on, and there's just I guess imagine the amount of effort and work that goes in with both the original education to get there to use the equipment, to then the performance piece, and then just how that balances with personhood. Um, so, kind of hoping to get a better sense of how you have gotten to where you are, where you're going, and what music means.
Yeah. So I started this journey as a 14-year-old kid. When I grew up, I wasn't allowed to listen to any music except Christian music. Sometimes I would sneak and listen to other stuff. But when I reached adolescence, I suddenly had this experience of checking out all this new music that was out. Like, this is what rock music is. This is what hip hop really is. And I was going to like a community center where they taught me like the fundamentals of hip hop and the fundamentals of all these different genres. For my 13th birthday, I begged my mom to get me a guitar. And I played that guitar 24/7. I had no idea what I was doing with it. I was just obsessed with music. That's all I knew. And humble beginnings, my mom was very ill. I traveled around a lot. We didn't have a lot of money for music gear. And so, whatever gear I got in front of me, I just made it my goal to learn it as best as I could inside and out because I knew where I wanted to take the instrument, once I got there. And then fast forward to like being an older adult, I had even less money and my guitar needed repairs and all I had was a laptop for school. And I still had this burning drive to make music while I was in school. Like I felt like I couldn't focus on my education because there was just something missing in my life. So I started learning to produce electronic music, which is also one of the things I discovered in my adolescence. And growing up in the 90s, when you wanted to find new music and good quality music, you had to dig for it. Like there was no YouTube, there was no like the internet was like your basic dial-up connection. If you were lucky, you got Napster before the cops shut it down. So when I found electronic music as a kid, it was a really like overwhelming experience to me the way that like different elements of sound can come together to build up to something so big. A lot of the sounds were like sampled. A lot of the sounds were just like these huge synths, and I didn't really understand it all, but I knew that I loved it. And so later in life, when I was able to actually do it myself, I became really passionate about that. So music has always been a part of basically my mental health, and so I'm always constantly doing it. Always have a goal set ahead of me, no matter what it is, whether it's working like a crappy job for years at a time to afford the gear that I have, or like using student loans or using grants or whatever resources I can get my hands on to get the gear that I need to produce the music that I want to produce. I'm always thinking, I'm always plotting, and I'm always making sacrifices just to make that happen.
Mm, yeah. And I was kind of connect to what you were saying just about that almost building blocks within the gear where so often, especially now where there's just this like endless plugins and endless stuff and there's just this, oh well, your sound isn't great, so you just need this, or this you want to be professional, so you need to buy this. And to where you end up with like a whole garage center sorry,
Yeah,
guitar center in your house without maybe only learning 20% of each plug-in, each item.
that's right. And when that happens, because the first time I like was able to go to school, and I was, taking out loans was a big decision for the first time, and I knew I was taking a risk. I knew I was probably hurting myself in the future, but I'm like, look, I need this specific gear to make the music that I need to make. And it turned out that that gear was obsolete a couple years later. And not only that, it wasn't the right stuff that you need to professionally produce music. So now, before I make a purchase decision, I save up for months at a time. And while I'm saving up, I'm also researching everything I can about that specific piece of gear, who designed it, what it was designed for, all of the things that it can do, and how it will work with me before I make any purchases. And just to avoid any waste, like every piece of gear that I own has a specific purpose for a specific thing, and me choosing that piece of gear means that I don't choose other pieces. So having that component in mind when you're like not a very wealthy person and you have to decide like what gear you actually need to make the music that you want to make, um, it's very important to consider what you want your future as a musician to look like, and if you can do that, accomplish that thing with the gear you have. And a lot of times you can. A lot of times all you need is studio monitors, headphones, studio headphones, a good microphone, and a laptop. And you can, many of producers have made hits that have been on the radio, have done world tours, have gotten signed to record labels with just that amount of gear. So if you don't have the latest gear, you can still do it. The latest gear just saves you time. That's pretty much all it does. If you're working, a 9 to 5, 40 hours a week, plus you got like school or whatever you got going on, you're not going to have time to make music on a laptop all the time. So sometimes having more advanced gear is more efficient. But even then, there are still ways that you can develop your workflow in Ableton or whatever DAW you use to make your process more efficient. So it's a matter of personal choice. But for me personally, like when I was in that after school program learning music for the first time, there's this guy named DJ Manav who taught us like how to use an MPC 2000 XL. And I knew at that moment that that's the piece of gear that I wanted. And one day I'm going to figure out how to, obtain it.
Mhm. Yeah. How would you describe kind of like your creative process? You say that you reference like samples or use samples in your music now. Kind of a change from originally just like doing things on a guitar, right? And writing purely with chords or your own ideas. How do you kind of incorporate either of those elements kind of like in your music that you make today?
Yeah. So when I go about producing a song, it's more about like what vibe do I want? How am I feeling right now? What do I want to express? And what tools and mediums do I have to express those emotions? Or I'll start with a sound and I'll play a sound and I'll be like, what inspiration does that sound give? What type of track does this sound like? And the third way I get inspiration to like start a track is I'll just be like listening to something on Spotify or YouTube. I'll be like, I want to make something exactly like that. So oftentimes, if it's something I don't know how to make myself, I will dive deep in tutorials for like weeks, learning the history of the genre and the style, and learning how producers who make that type of music do that and what
Sure.
they use. Sometimes it's sample based, sometimes it's like learning how to use a synthesizer and like VST plugin and figuring out how to do sound design. So there are a lot of elements that go into just me starting a track.
Sure.
But once I figure out what I want to do, I'll either lay down a drum beat and I'll be like, okay, this sounds more hip hop, or this sounds more house, or this sounds more tech house, um, or I'll like play a melody. Like I'll just like go in my studio and just like start playing something, and like this is a cool melody. What would sound good behind this melody? And once I figure out the direction I want to go, I build up from there. So I build up the entire song in one like loop, right? And so I have a loop of this song and I'm constantly mixing it, making sure it sounds good, adding different elements. And then once I have this big stack of this loop that doesn't go anywhere, then I start to break it down and spread it out into an even track.
Sure. Okay. Cool. So like your inspiration either comes just purely from like where what you're feeling, what you want to express, and also sometimes using external sounds or something that inspires you or kind
Yeah.
of gets you going in a certain direction, and then the creative process just unfolds from there.
Yeah, I think inspiration is everywhere.
Yeah.
Like every opportunity is like an opportunity to like create. When you if you ever like watch a movie and you listen to the music that's in the background, I kind of think about life like that. Like what music would go in the background of like how I'm feeling or like where I'm at right now in life. Or um when I think about myself as a musician, what does that look like? What am I doing? What am I playing? And how can I bring that to life?
Absolutely. Cool.
Yeah. And kind of within that bringing things to life, I'm just thinking of just that almost bringing where I think everybody has creativity and everybody has kind of just their this is just what I got to do.
Mhm.
Um, and with that, almost bringing that creativity to life, working within tech, working with as an artist, even just thinking of just the title, the entity that is color in reverse. A, how did that title come about? And then who is color in reverse and how is that different from, say, I always think of like the title like you at Target.
Yeah. So they're actually very intertwined. Color in reverse is something that's birthed from within inside me. To be more specific, when I came up with the name, I was really into like Taoism, like Buddhism, and the philosophy of Taoism deals with the concept of duality. It's kind of like what you talk to your uh, what you would talk to your dialectical behavioral therapist about, holding two conflicting ideas that can also mirror each other in some way. So, for example, when you look at color in reverse, the word color invokes this feeling of warmth, this feeling of like springtime, this feeling of vibrancy. And when you think about the reverse of that, you kind of get the feeling of something more shadowy, something absent of color. And so you have these two concepts, one being color and one being without color, and the feelings that come with that. And the idea behind that is with the feelings that come with, vibrancy and spring and like all these nice things, there can still exist like some form of negativity. And with the shadow parts of yourself, there can exist positivity. So it's kind of about the union of those two things. So when I tie it to the music that I make, like a lot of the music that I make is dark, but it doesn't mean that it's negative. And then a lot of the music that I make sounds happy too, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily without, a negative emotion. And so it's kind of a way to interpret the world from a perspective of, yes, you're going to face hard things in life. Yes, you're going to have good times. But within that cycle of good and bad, it's important to find the center and understand it. So color in reverse is just like my way of representing in like a visual sense the concepts that I live by. And then yeah, the Josh that's at Target is kind of a person who is very philosophical, but also very silly at the same time. Very, very deep, but also like likes to have fun and go out and do things. Hence why I became a musician. So yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah. And I'm just kind of thinking, even within Josh's world as come studying psychology and mental health, how does that work its way into the music field? Whether that's like the actual writing process or just existing in that creative realm.
So originally, I wanted to make music that taught mental health and that focused on like uplifting people in their darkest situations. But right now, I feel that I'm in a place where I'm making music that helps people understand that they're not alone. I think that key concept in mental health is important. The idea that the problems that we face aren't permanent, the idea that the problems that we face um, aren't singular to us, and that they can change and that they can get better. And I think one way to show people that, to demonstrate that, instead of just telling people things will get better, is to show people that I deal with like these hard things too. And sometimes they feel impossible to recover from, and not to sit in that mentality, but to explore the fact that like even though I'm suffering, I'm still here making music. I'm still here doing what I feel is right for me to do in life, and living by that example. I hope encourages people to do the same instead of just sitting with their problems alone. I hope it encourages people to like share the music with other people who are going through similar things. and I'm hoping to build community for people who have negative feelings, and show them the more colorful side, and show people who are on the more colorful side that things can get really deep too, and it's important to have empathy and understand the perspectives of others. So, as I study psychology, as I study the mind, as I study emotions and the mental processes that we go through throughout our daily life, I understand the way that music itself affects moods, affects ideals, like fosters revolution and change in the world, simply by like the ideas that we put forth in our music. So yeah, I've done research on that throughout my college career, and I hope to bring more of that, more intention into what I'm doing based on the research that I've done.
How do you feel like your artistic process, like creating music, how has that related to like your own mental health?
So during times when I have like mental health issues, I have type 2 bipolar. And so there are definitely like lulls in my daily life where I feel like there's not much that I can do. Um, and in those times, there's always one thing that I can do, and it's create. Even if I'm not advising this, but even if I have to miss work, even if I have to be alone for a while, I still have the power to get up and play a melody, even if I'm not making a whole song. And just doing that for me is something that grounds me and brings me like control over my emotions and my thoughts because it gives me something to focus on, and it also gives me like a way to transition my emotions into other aspects and talk about them away in a way through music that I wouldn't necessarily be able to express through words.
Hmm.
So music is pretty much an essential part of my life.
Yeah, I think that's really neat how, it can be a positive, just like coping skill, like from a mental health point of view, right? Helping someone express and process their emotions, but you can also use that and channel that into something like creative. And actually, it can be like a really transformative process for you too, it sounds like.
Yeah,
Super neat.
I feel pretty lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where it's like, um, I'm thinking of, I like what you said about the missing work piece because I think there, on one hand, we always hear like mental health is health, but at the same time, there's still this kind of like, but why aren't you at work? Why aren't you doing this in the same way? Like, if like you have a cold, it might, or the flu, it might be okay. I need to stay home and take my cold medicine. Or the same way with other situations, okay, I might be staying home and playing this melody, and just that. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it's interesting as you've been talking a lot about um, the social, the community side of things. Um, I'm just thinking of Carl, the psychologist Carl Jung, with where a lot of his work was on there. You got the shadow side, where everything is, and there's persona, which will be shown to others. And there's that collective unconscious, which is that mystical cloud that connects and joins everybody, and everybody is kind of operating off of the same framework of parents, and whether it be the parent with rewind play, whether it be like the different parenting archetypes or the hero villain archetypes or just the how are you functioning and all the things that people share that kind of weaves them together, and seeing it sounds like a lot of your philosophy around music and life is really kind of diving into that cloud of how is how are everybody connected and how can I help them realize that they're not alone.
Yeah, I think that's a very astute observation.
And you're out of frame, sir.
Oh, that's all right.
That's why
Yeah,
I
join us.
scooted over. I was leaning a lot.
But yeah,
I think you are too, Vaughn.
Oh
yeah.
yeah, I give up.
Oh.
I moved around too much.
But no, I'm a fan of Young. I believe that part of feeling like a part of the collective in general means having a deep understanding of yourself. And I feel that having a deep understanding of yourself requires you to be able to sit with both the negative aspects and the positive aspects and view them from a lens of impartiality. You can examine the cognitive distortions or the negative thoughts that you have in life and challenge them. You have that power to do that. You have that power to um, have empathy for the people in your life and say, hey, I went through a situation like this, so I understand how this person might feel. And when you understand how someone else feels, even if you're not in the same room as them, it gives you a connection to them. I think that humans can be self-serving, just because, especially in the West, because we live in an individualistic culture. So we tend to get hyper focused on our own self frame. And sometimes we forget that, we don't exist in a vacuum. And so examining like all aspects of yourself and examining how you relate to others and how others relate to you and the interconnectedness of everything, just like not even with people, but with like going outside and observing like nature, looking at trees and being like, yo, this thing gives me oxygen. That's cool. And I give it CO2. We're all connected. Um, just knowing that alone, that information alone is just so powerful. And when you want to create art, I feel like for me, that's like the place where it comes from is like, I hear all these influences and artists that I enjoy, and I feel a connection to them based on what they're doing. And I'm like, I can do that too. I can add to this conversation.
So connecting to and like recognizing that oneness, like the connection to everything, that's an integral part of like your artistic process. Would you say? Is that something is that ever challenging to get into that state or like that frame of mind that allows you to kind of create in that way?
Very much so. There's a lot of outside pressure that tells you you're not an artist unless you're doing A, B, and C. And I see like friends and others in the community like running around like headless chickens trying to follow the formula of what it means to be an artist, what it means to be a successful artist, how to make a living out of doing art. But one thing I realize is that no matter what happens with what I create, as long as I'm creating something authentic, whether people like it or not, I'm doing a service to myself. And like even if I jump into the framework of business, I always try and approach it from the perspective of like I need to stay grounded in this space of my authentic artistic vision or like creativity, creative will or whatever before like I can even like venture into the world of business because if I don't have that grounded sense of who I am and what I'm doing, then I'll become something that isn't me and then I won't enjoy creating anymore.
Mhm.
So the biggest challenge is the outside pressure to, oh, you got to post TikToks weekly. You got to dress this way. You got to look cool. You got to do this and that. All of that, I just try and have fun with it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it kind of just consumes you.
Yeah, I think it's really cool because kind of given your story, you said you grew up. It sounded like maybe your musical listening abilities were kind of limited, like you could only listen to certain genres, and just how you've expanded that over time. You've learned more, and that's allowed you to really like express yourself like more authentically and everything.
Yeah.
Sounds cool.
Yeah, it kind of felt like I was in a cocoon growing up. I grew up in like the city of Richfield. That's where I like lived the longest. And it was during a time when like black people were just like all migrating to the suburbs because like affordable housing had come to Richfield. And so like and then on the other side of Richfield is Edina, the people they call cake eaters. No offense. But like they're the people in Richfield who couldn't afford to live in Edina, so they were like mad and they were considered the poor folk. So when we moved in, we got a lot of like we were met with a lot of confusion and ostracization and what box do you fit in? Who are you? You're black. Like what does that mean? Like you don't act black, you don't act but you're not white. Like I don't know where to categorize you. So there was a lot of like identity displacement growing up. And so I had to cultivate my own identity through the things that loved and I was passionate about. And so from there, like I always like had the mindset of being authentic because if you don't control the narrative of who you are, others will always try and force one on you.
Mm, absolutely. So part of if you were to talk to like another artist who was on that, trying to express themselves more authentically, one of the biggest factors you think is just being aware of other pressures that can try to conform you or put you into a box or that can otherwise be limiting.
Yeah, and it comes from capitalism, right? Um, Capitalism creates a product of what an artist is, so that you can purchase it.
Okay.
And if you try to become that, it becomes difficult because people who are at the top of that chain have resources backing them up,
Mhm.
and they're all sacrificing part of themselves to be a part of that resource, that enterprise.
Sure.
So if you're just starting out and you're trying to figure out what type of artist I should be, what type of gear do I need, how do I need to look, what type of music do I need to make, honestly, just get a phone, get an app, and just start making stuff that feels right to you,
Mhm.
and then the rest will come from there.
Yeah. I think, there's the product like capitalist pressure. And also, I think something that we've talked about on here before is just certain ideals or expectations of like what it means to be a successful artist, right? Whether
Mhm.
that's status or recognition or like whatever it is. Sometimes we have like a certain idea of what like success as an artist looks like, and sometimes that can be like a barrier to ourselves, like expressing ourselves authentically, creatively, kind of more from like the inside out, because we're trying to kind of work from the outside in. You
That's
know,
right.
is there anything that helps you tap into your more like authentic self, or ways that you would maybe encourage or help someone else learn how to do that so they can learn to express themselves more authentically?
The first thing I would suggest is to make, like, this is gonna sound cheesy as hell, but there's like look at your emojis on your phone, and every day ask yourself, which one am I feeling?
Hmm.
Which emoji is me today? Which resonates the most with me? And that's a good place to start so that you can understand how you feel. And once you understand how you feel, you can take that into other situations around you.
Sure.
And you can be like, okay, this situation happened today at work. How do I feel about that? How does it resonate with me? I know I'm interpreting a message from society about, how I feel about what happened at work, but how does it resonate with me? How do I actually feel? And that's the first key. And then after you understand how you feel, and you want to start understanding who you are. So you want to understand what your values are, what your boundaries are, like all that stuff.
Mhm.
And then in general, another thing you want to understand is your own message. If you could give one message to the world, what would it be?
Mm.
What causes are important to you? What factors in your life and your memories have led you to be the person who you are today? Really think about your childhood memories. Really think about like everything that makes up the soup that is you,
Mm.
and then express yourself from that point, and don't let anyone else disrupt that bubble. Of course, welcome people in at your own discretion, but really understanding who you are is understanding your sacrifice, your pain, your joy, your history, and your boundaries.
Mm. Yeah. I think that just really ties into mental health, like that overlap between musical creation and mental health, how a big part of that artistic creative expression, like knowing yourself more, including all those factors and things that you mentioned, can really be discovered through music. And also just like, I suppose being an artist really can kind of challenge you to kind of do those deep dives and really dig in to understanding yourself more too.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
I mean, I've got a shortcut because I was just like born a philosophical person. I know a lot of people are, if you want to look at it from like a personality perspective, some people think there are people who are less intuitive and more focused and more like rigid and more like type A, and like they don't really go that deep. They understand what is practical. And I think there's a lot of power in that too. And whatever perspective that you come from in life, it doesn't matter what type of personality you have, where you come from. Each person's got a story to tell,
Mm.
and like, just ask yourself, what is your story, and what do you like, and how do you want to express yourself? Because you also have to realize that you first have the freedom to express yourself. There are people in society who tell you to shut down all the time.
Mhm.
No matter what you do, no matter who you are, society is always going to tell you somehow that you're not worth it, that you don't matter, that like your story is insignificant, you're taking up too much space, but it's all bullshit. You have the power. This is your life. This is your only time on this planet. So if you're not doing what you love and expressing yourself, whether that just be like working in an office or whatever it is, just do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was kind of thinking with that, as someone who kind of as you've been transitioning from kind of that solo music production to doing more shows and setting up bigger events and kind of having almost kind of like spreading that community framework out. Curious, how have you kind of navigated that almost wall in a sense? I don't want to say wall, but I guess that maybe an obstacle where there's a lot of artists who are very much, we love this art, and then there's a lot of, then you have like a lot of, say, the algorithms for playlists, the venues, or maybe have more of a capitalistic leaning of a, well, how many followers you got, how much money do you have up front, and a lot of those um, kind of maybe superficial requirements people kind of put on artists that can maybe be in opposition, or is there an opposition?
There definitely is. It's sad because like the Minneapolis music scene has changed over the last few years, but it's always been seen as like a crabs in a barrel type of situation. Whenever someone tries to climb to the top, there's always someone to pull you down because they want that spot too. And it's like I said, it's another just like corporate manipulation that trickles down to each music community, and it's a resource scarcity idea. Like there's not enough for everyone, but there is enough for everyone, and that's why it's important to share what you have, share the spotlight. If you're constantly only worried about yourself, if you're constantly only worried about how you look, if everything is just about your appearance, then you're going to burn a lot of people and they're not going to want to work with you because music is always a community effort. Like if you think back to like original drum circles, even like it's a shared conversation. Without all the drummers there, it's not a drum circle. And so when I run into that, um, it tells me who to work with and who not to work with because I've been burned a lot with like people um, inviting me to a show just because they needed to fill a spot and then like treating me like dirt once I got there and then not paying me and like I've had to what's the word? I've had to pay my dues. Definitely. One thing that helped though is before I was even like when I was too scared to play shows or whatever, I would go to shows and I would meet the musicians of the bands that I liked. And I'd like get to know them on a personal level. I'd have dinner at their house. I'd hang out with them. I'd talk about music. I'd jam with them. And so I knew before I like even went into the music scene in the cities, I knew that the people that I'm working with are good people, people that I can trust, people that are actually aligned with the goals that I'm aligned with. And I think from there, naturally, those numbers that you need to become successful build up, and it all adds up to something bigger. And even if you don't like with jobs in general, this is like just general life advice. Most of the jobs you're going to get in life are from references. They're not from being qualified. I've gotten jobs that I've not been qualified for just because I knew people. That's how I got into IT. Um, it's the same with the music scene. If a record producer, for a record label guy likes you as a person, and they like your music, you have a good chance. If the people around that person, if the community supports you, you have that chance. Even if your numbers are bad, even if you don't meet all the cross the I's and dot the T's, like if you are an altruistic person and you work well with others and you have boundaries and you don't let people stiff you over, you can go really, really far. And so I try not to worry about numbers so much and more about community and relationships because that's where authentic numbers come from. And that's why a lot of people like use bots because they have trouble like building community and building relationships with people that are built on authentic principles, goals, and ideas that are common among your audience.
Yeah.
I know I went a little too broad there,
No, yeah,
but
I'm really connecting that. I think like even just that is one of the reasons why I think like our paths have crossed so many times from when, what was it? Oh yeah, I was practicing concert photography, so I went to that show.
uh,
And meeting you as a person before you got on stage is like, oh, I didn't know they were playing.
yeah.
And then the friends who are with you were also seem to be solid people. And then yeah, to where you could have played a really if you did great, but even if you had done a crappy set, I still would have been a lot more like, huh, I need to follow up. Versus, again, thinking back to whether it be, I don't know, I'm just thinking of different venues, even where it was great, it was very professional, we had a great time playing, but just given whether it be the personality or personability or different things, of maybe even the staff, there's kind of a, even if I get paid, I don't want to
Yeah.
come back. In the same way with that, a lot of the artists and venue owners or anybody within the scene here, where albeit there is maybe that like those people in the shadows who are kind of in it for themselves, just kind of really seeing and highlighting the people who are just so focused on the community element and I like people and I like doing what I'm doing.
So, yeah, exactly. And that being said, the show I put on recently, it's going to become a residency. It's called Neon Dark. It's a cyberpunk theme wonderland of music and games and drinks and fun. It's really cool. The reason why I got that spot is because I played a show a long time ago with a guy, and it was with someone who was like really prominent in the scene, and they stuck us on the bill and they didn't pay us, and like, but we bonded, we became friends. And come to find out, they're now like the host at, or the venue host and the booker and the sound person at Can Wonderland, which is where I hosted Neon Dark. And they like we were still in contact from that interaction. Like, hey, I see what you're doing these days. Come out and do it here. And when I got there, they were very hospitable. We had a relationship already, just because we established that from just getting to know each other in like a crappy situation in the music scene that we now kind of laugh about. So it's really about connection and building relationships wherever you go. Um, a lot of times when I meet people, I don't even tell them I do music, you know, um, just because it's not even about that. Like, I want to like understand your perspectives as also like a person and also a listener. So when you finally do hear the music, I can trust that you'll give me your honest feedback too, you know? So yeah, it's really important.
I feel like that like all ties together, especially even with what we were talking about earlier, just about like that collective conscious sort of deal. Like
Mm.
when you're able to see things in that state of mind, or you know what I mean, just that level or that perspective, it really, I feel, kind of changes all your relationships. It changes your relationship to music, it changes your relationship with people, and just like with your life. And it sounds like for you, developing that connection to like the collective has been really like impactful, or it's done a lot in terms of those areas like your music and like your social relationships. And it sounds like that all kind of comes together.
Yeah, yeah, it ties in with my beliefs as just like a person. Like as far as like marketing goes, I post TikToks on my story. My TikTok algorithm is so tailored to my sense of humor that I just get constantly good stuff. And I don't know. Sometimes people are more following me for the TikTok stories that I post than the music, but they also like the music. And just like having like a situation where like I can just laugh with the people who admire me is building connection. It's doing all the things you want to accomplish. It's building numbers. It's keeping people engaged with your content. So that way when I do have a show to promote, people like log on to, or check my story to see what funny TikTok I posted, and they're like, "Oh, Kelowna Verse is hosting this event. Okay, I'm gonna come out." So yeah, it all builds on itself. Like this collective unconsciousness, the fact that we're all like lonely, miserable human beings that all need connection, and just building the bridge for that connection. Um, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I think you described that really well. Did you have any questions, Molly? I had one question that I
Go
was
for it.
kind of curious about.
Yeah.
So you talked about like a message in your music, and we've really kind of done a deep dive. We've talked about like metaphysics, we've talked about like mental health and like emotions, and just like we've talked about things on like the outer higher levels metaphysically, and also like personally. Do you feel, or like what is, would you say, kind of like the overall message, if any, or kind of like emotional tone, or maybe both of those things together, or two separate things that you want to like convey or express overall in your music? Or is it just very different based on kind of where you're at or the track or album or?
Well, I've got another long answer for you.
That's great.
So yeah. First and foremost, it's got to sound good. I'm bringing the best that I can. I'm not the fucking greatest producer in the world, but I'm good. I'm good enough to make you dance, make you move, and make you have fun.
Mhm.
Or just like make you sit there and go, "Oh, that sounds cool as hell." Like if I can do that, I'm already doing my job. So that's actually a central core part of my philosophy that I don't talk about a lot. Like I want you to move, I want you to headbang, I want you to dance, I want you to cry, I want you to laugh,
Yeah.
I want you to have fun. But then I also want you to um, understand that like the hard shit that you're going through, like I mentioned before, isn't just you. We all go through it on different levels, and I can't
Mm.
necessarily identify with everyone's personal struggle. But I've been through crazy shit that like people wouldn't even comprehend, and I find it very hard to relate to people on that level. So the only way I can express that level is to say, "Hey, anyone else feel this way?" And then like someone's like, "Yeah, I feel this way." And like the overall message is just connection and understanding that every person on this earth has a valuable message and a valuable story to tell, and you're not alone. Let's go out and dance.
Yeah. I like, you mentioned about doing that through your own example and also like sonically through
Uh-huh.
the music, like whether someone's listening to your track on an MP3 or watching you do it in a live performance, like you're still communicating that. I remember when I saw your show at Inver Grove, like the community college. I swear, even if the music wasn't there, just like seeing you up there with the lights and just like vibing to your music, I felt like that alone like communicated and like it resonated something in me that I was like, yeah, like I just want to like move and dance and like have a good time. And I think it's really cool that you've been able to capture that as like a live performer and also, like sonically too. That's really awesome. That's what it's all about.
That's great to hear. I'm glad to get that feedback. I'm glad you like had a good time and were vibing.
Yeah.
With my live performances, my philosophy is like, if I'm not having fun, how can I expect anyone else to? I did a show recently where like it was really hot in this like huge garage, and then someone opened the large garage door, and then everyone went outside, and then I went up to perform to like four people, and I wear like a holographic mask when I perform, and with that holographic mask, it's hard for me to see out of it, and so I'm just up there like dancing my ass off, just like burning all sorts of calories, doing all sorts of calisthenics, doing martial arts, flips, breakdancing, like all this stuff, because I'm like, I gotta make this show fun for people. And like, come to find out, they're like over there, like outside, just vibing hard, and I'm like, nobody likes what I'm doing. Oh no. But yeah, and so to me, it's about having fun, and if I don't get a good response from the audience, I'm not having enough fun. I need to. So yeah.
Any story like behind the mask? That was one thing I noticed about like
Yeah.
one of the first things I noticed visually about your
So
show. Yeah.
so one day, I was like, the game Cyberpunk 2077 came out.
Rip.
The funny thing
Yeah.
is, I talk about Cyberpunk a lot if you follow me on like line, but like, I never played the game. I never played the damn game, and there was always this thing that I liked, and I couldn't put words to it. And when that game came out, a series of playlists came out on YouTube, and they were all like cyberpunk based, and they had these like silly titles like Revenge and Desolation, and it always had like a male gaze photo of some like cyber chick. But the playlist was like this new genre, mid tempo house, and it just like was more industrial, EBM, just really dark and dystopian. And I'm like, I like that. And then I like went and looked up the history of cyberpunk, and I read like Neuromancer and watched Blade Runner, and like I watched a lot of documentaries on how technology is affecting our world in both a negative way and a positive way, and how capitalism and like basically the global elites are people with money and wealth, um, make it difficult for technology to be a positive thing because we live in a society that's full of oppression and all these different things that mean that like inequalities that mean that technology can benefit some but destroy the lives of others. And so like I'm like, oh, okay, so for this chapter of Color in Reverse, I want to do something cyberpunk themed. And I'm like, what's the latest, coolest technology that's out right now that I can incorporate in my show that would like make it look like super futuristic? And so I started Googling like holographic technology. Computers are chips are super powerful and super small. There was a chip shortage for a while, but they've allowed us to create very advanced devices. And one of the first things I found was a holographic Halloween mask. And I'm like, why is it holographic? It just looks like one of those LED masks. And when I got it, it actually plays animations. So you can load different animations. It has like animations on it. And I'm like, oh, this is perfect. And then I'm like, what other holographic technology can I find? And then I found this holographic fan that I saw a long time ago. I remembered that it existed. And it's basically an LED fan. And when it spins, those LED lights can play animations. So we're living in the future that I like grew up with in the 90s, like waiting for. There was this like big emphasis growing up that once the new technology comes out, life's going to be better for everyone. And then as it came out, it's been like more difficult and more complex for everyone. And so I'm like, these are some of the fun things that have come out of our developments. We actually live in the future that I grew up wishing for. And we actually have like things like hologram technology and smartphones and like all this stuff. So I want to dive into it and embrace it, and then use it to tell the story of how we're being destroyed by our society through developing technologies.
So you're doing it sonically and also like visually too. That's cool.
Yeah, got to keep the shows interesting.
For sure.
You said this chapter of Color in Reverse
Uh-huh.
are. I also remember you don't. You said you're not a person who usually thinks ahead. Um, so are we just vibing in this chapter, or do you have like a whole book
Yeah, we're
laid out?
we're vibing in this
Are we going to
chapter.
be high fantasy in a couple years?
Actually, yeah, I'm writing a grimoire that's gonna be like a album. So it's like spells and magic and stuff, and like my Taoist philosophy, but it's all music. That's for later though. But yeah, how it happened was it was just spare of the moment. I was doing like house music that was like a little bit of like anime sounding and like kawaii adjacent sounding before I got into the cyberpunk stuff. And in between that, I was actually in a transition in a band called Bloody Pink, and we played like local goth music, like romantic, dark, more like sort of new wave, sort of death rock in the middle type of vibes. So I did that for a year, and that just like built this craving in me for darker music than what I was doing before I joined the band. And as soon as I like left that band, that's when I started seeing all this cyberpunk stuff, and I was like, "Oh, this has the vibes of like industrial and EBM and dark wave, but it's like a little different. It has like a different flavor to it." And so I kind of vibe with whatever like inspires me, and I like rush to create that thing. And so right now the chapter is cyberpunk. The next chapter is probably going to be my grimoire. Who knows what happens after